100 tons of bananas lowered into the desert, not traded in markets, not served at tables, not shipped across oceans, buried, in silence, in sand. It looks absurd, a cruel joke against the hungry, food thrown away where children still cry for bread. But look closer. What seems like waste is in fact wager. What looks like folly is in truth defiance. Because in Burkina Faso, a banana is not merely sweetness. It is potassium, phosphorus, carbon, the missing pulse of a soil long starved. This is not a burial. It is a planting, not of trees but of sovereignty, not of fruit but of freedom. President Ibrahim Traoré called it Project Green Pulse, a gesture both strange and staggering. To feed the earth itself, so the nation no longer bows before the cargo ships that arrive with debt disguised as aid. And so the question rises from the dust. Was this madness, or the first seed of a revolution? Stay with us. What the world mocks today may tomorrow be remembered as the harvest of dignity. Subscribe and walk with this story as history unfolds. It began with a rumor in Ouagadougou, not of soldiers marching, not of weapons stockpiled, not of new debts signed in distant capitals. The whisper was stranger. The government was collecting bananas. At first, no one understood. Markets buzzed with confusion. Traders watched convoys roll away not with sacks of millet or crates of tomatoes, but with fruit, ripe, overripe, even spoiled bananas stacked high on trucks. From warehouses and cold storage depots, from roadside stalls and village markets, the fruit was gathered in tons. In only days, 100 tons had been assembled. The destination was not kitchens, not tables, not export ships. It was the desert itself. Under the pitiless sun of the Sahel, soldiers and villagers dug shallow pits in cracked earth. Into those hollows they poured bananas, by the crate, by the basket, by the handful. Some buried them in rows like crops. Others cast them down in clusters, as if dropping yellow treasure into the dust. The scene was surreal. Children giggled, balancing bunches on their heads, tossing them into pits as though playing a game. Old women crossed themselves, whispering prayers as fruit disappeared into the sand. Drums sounded in some villages, songs rose in the air. The atmosphere was part festival, part ritual. Yet not all were convinced. Farmers muttered, "Bananas are life. How can life be thrown away?" Traders shouted that it was madness. Families who had fought to place food on the table stood in confusion. To them, each fruit buried was a meal lost. "Why bury food when people are hungry?" became the refrain echoing across markets and homes. But the government's voice was unshaken. This, they said, was not destruction but investment. President Ibrahim Traoré, his name already a symbol of defiance in the Sahel, declared that Burkina Faso would no longer kneel before ships docking in foreign ports, their holds stacked with fertilizer sold at a price higher than dignity. Instead, the nation would use what it already had in abundance: its own organic matter, its own waste turned into wealth, its own fruit transformed into a future. The banana ceased to be only food. It became emblem. To some it was absurd, to others audacious. But for the government it was a weapon. Because every peel carried potassium, every mush of overripeness held phosphorus, every blackened fruit released carbon. The very lifeblood that Sahelian soil had been robbed of by decades of drought, overuse, and imported chemicals. For the first time, the people were asked to see fruit not as sweetness, but as sovereignty. Teachers explained it to their pupils. A banana is more than breakfast. It is life for the soil. Children repeated the phrase, laughing as they threw bunches into pits, planting yellow trees. In some villages, the burial was called feeding the desert. In others, elders recognized echoes of their past. "In our youth, we buried milk to call for rain," one old man recalled. "Now our children bury bananas to call for life." It was as though an ancient ritual had been reborn in modern form. What the world mocked as desperation was, for many inside the country, memory, continuity, hope. Still, doubt lingered. Could rotting fruit truly revive land that had lain barren for decades? Could waste become wealth? Could this bold gamble turn dust into harvest? For the farmers who had seen seeds wither year after year, the questions cut deep. One man from the north spoke aloud what many thought. "We have planted for years, and nothing grew. Why should bananas be different?" And yet, alongside skepticism, a current of belief began to flow. The government promised science, promised results, but they also demanded patience, so the pits filled, day after day, crate after crate, until the 100 tons had vanished beneath the soil. Foreign reporters filmed children carrying bananas like offerings. Skeptical traders glared at cameras, declaring it waste. Soldiers stood guard not against enemies, but against doubt itself. And as the sun set over the desert, the yellow fruit rotted unseen, hidden under the dust. What would rise in its place? Rot or renewal? Madness or miracle? That answer, whispered the government, would come soon. And when it came, it might silence the world's laughter. For weeks the desert was silent. Bananas lay buried beneath the sand, invisible, mocked, dismissed. Foreign headlines sneered, villagers doubted, and hunger still pressed against every door. And then after 3 weeks the earth spoke. In fields once barren, green tips pierced the dust. First a blade here, a sprig there. Then whole rows of millet and sorghum pushed through the soil that had for years given nothing but thorns. Farmers gathered at the edges of test plots, crouching low, fingers trembling as they touched the tender shoots. "It feels alive again," one farmer whispered. "For 10 years I planted here and nothing answered. Now the soil breathes." State television wasted no time. Close-up shots of seedlings rising from cracked ground filled screens across the nation. Children cheered. Teachers marched classes out to witness history. In some villages, the burial pits were renamed Gardens of Hope. The slogan spread faster than skepticism. "When the earth eats, we all eat." It became a chant in schoolyards, a proverb on radio, a sermon in Sunday prayers. What outsiders saw as waste, insiders began to celebrate as resurrection. Elders recognized an echo of rituals long past. "In my youth," one man in Kaya recalled, "we poured milk into the soil to call down rain. Today our children bury bananas to call up life. Nothing has changed." For them, Project Green Pulse was not foreign science. It was ancestral memory reborn. The mood shifted. What began as mockery turned into music. Drums sounded as villagers tossed fruit into fresh pits, not with doubt, but with pride. Children painted walls with bananas as symbols of hope. Soldiers who had once stood guard against suspicion now joined in song. And yet, beyond the laughter and the drums, the outside world continued to sneer. In Paris, newspapers ran cartoons of Africans dancing around pits of fruit, mocking the phrase Banana Republic with cruel glee. On French television, an anchor joked, "Perhaps next time they will bury baguettes." In London, analysts dismissed the project as political theater. In Washington, think tanks declared it unsustainable, warning of starvation cloaked in symbolism. But in Moscow, the tone was different. Russian state outlets hailed Traoré as an innovator, comparing his gamble to their own history of surviving sanctions through self-reliance. "They laugh because he refuses to beg," one broadcaster declared. History remembers those who create from nothing. In Beijing, agricultural experts nodded quietly, citing China's own history of using organic waste to restore exhausted fields. State media praised Burkina Faso's courage, hinting at future partnership. In Ankara, Turkish commentators called it a triumph of dignity. Bananas in the soil, dignity in the heart. And across Africa, the ripple became a wave. In Bamako, crowds chanted Traoré's name as though he were their own leader. In Niamey, radio stations debated how such an experiment could be adopted across Niger's drought-stricken plains. In Senegal and Guinea, what began as memes of banana pits soon transformed into symbols of pride. The world outside saw absurdity. The world inside saw sovereignty. The laughter of foreigners was drowned by the songs of villagers. What looked like comedy to one continent became courage to another. Yet beneath the celebration, unease grew. Critics still asked, were bananas truly capable of sustaining an agricultural revolution? Or were they merely symbols, sparks to ignite hope, but not enough to feed nations? Then came the revelation that darkened the joy. A leaked document, allegedly from a French diplomatic cable, began to circulate online. It did not speak of soil. It did not speak of science. It spoke of money. According to the memo, European fertilizer corporations were deeply alarmed by Burkina Faso's banana project. If it worked, the report warned, it could slash Africa's dependency on imported chemicals, a market worth billions each year. The cable suggested that Project Green Pulse might destabilize trade flows and undermine European leverage in West Africa. Even more explosive, it speculated that the banana burials could mask other aims, biofuel experiments, hidden financing through agricultural cooperatives, even covert funds diverted from foreign oversight. Suddenly, the story of villagers laughing as they carried bananas on their heads seemed less innocent. Was this truly about soil, or was it a stratagem against invisible chains of dependency? The leak split opinion. Some Burkinabe felt betrayed, fearing elites had used their labor as cover for a darker game. Others dismissed it as Western propaganda, another attempt to ridicule and undermine an experiment that was already bearing green proof. But the question could no longer be ignored. Were bananas food for the earth, or weapons in a silent war over sovereignty? And that question, heavy as sand, was about to ignite the next battle in Project Green Pulse. The first shoots did more than pierce the soil, they pierced the silence. In villages that had long abandoned hope, news spread like fire. Green had returned where only dust had ruled. Families walked miles to see it for themselves, to touch leaves rising where thorns once grew. For the first time in years, the Sahel seemed less like a graveyard of seeds and more like a cradle of life. But the miracle of green carried consequences deeper than roots. Markets in Ouagadougou buzzed with argument. Traders complained that their livelihoods had been disrupted. One vendor told reporters, "I could have sold those bananas for my children's school fees. Now they are buried." His words carried both anger and grief, the voice of those who saw food as coins, not compost. At the same time, rural families began to feel a different shift. For them, the cost of imported fertilizer had always been a heavy burden. Year after year, they had watched harvests eaten away not just by drought, but by debt. To these households, Project Green Pulse was not a stunt. It was relief. It meant freedom from dependence on ships docking in foreign ports, each sack of fertilizer arriving with strings attached. Children, too, were transformed by the experiment. In classrooms, teachers turned the banana pits into lessons. "Bananas feed us once," one teacher explained, "but they feed the earth forever." Pupils repeated the phrase with pride, as though reciting a new anthem. Some carried baskets of fruit to burial sites, laughing as they joined their elders. In their hands, a banana ceased to be breakfast and became a seed of sovereignty. The psychological impact was profound. For decades, dependency had not only shaped the economy, it had shaped the mind. Aid convoys, fertilizer imports, foreign grants, each one taught a subtle lesson. Survival comes from abroad. Now suddenly the lesson shifted. Villagers saw that survival might rise from their own soil. What seemed like waste became wealth. What looked like absurdity became agency. Politically, the tremors spread. In Parliament, opposition figures accused the government of deception, pointing to the leaked French cable as proof that Project Green Pulse was a curtain to hide black budgets. They argued that while ordinary people labored in the sun, elites played games with international corporations. Some even demanded inquiries into whether the banana burials masked covert deals in biofuel or hidden financing. Yet on the other side, the government held firm. Officials released preliminary data. Test plots showed soil acidity falling, microbial activity tripling, fertility up 60% in 6 weeks. For them, the numbers were proof that Project Green Pulse was not a distraction, but a revolution in motion. And the people were divided. In markets, skepticism lingered. In villages, pride grew. Soldiers spoke on local radio, declaring that burying bananas was not weakness, but warfare of another kind. One young officer put it simply, "We bury fruit, but we are sowing freedom." His words became a rallying cry, painted on walls and chanted at gatherings. The consequences stretched further still. Economically, Burkina Faso had been spending more than $100 million each year on imported fertilizers, a drain that tied the nation's budget to foreign conditions. By replacing even 30% of those imports with organic alternatives, the government calculated savings worth millions, funds that could be redirected to schools, hospitals, or defense. This was not only agriculture, it was sovereignty written in numbers. Socially, the shift reshaped dignity itself. Elders remembered a time when African traditions offered food to soil and spirits. Now their grandchildren performed a similar ritual, not for the unseen, but for the future. It restored continuity between past and present, memory and hope. And politically, a new narrative began to form. Burkina Faso as more than a landlocked state in crisis, but as a vanguard of African ingenuity. Commentators across the Sahel began to ask, if one nation could turn waste into wealth, what stopped the rest? Was this not the essence of African leadership, to lead not by mimicry of foreign models, but by creating new paths from the soil itself? Yet questions remained unanswered. Could such organic methods sustain an entire nation? Would villagers still cheer when harvests failed or when hunger knocked again? And what of the powerful corporations that profited from Africa's dependency? Would they allow this experiment to grow unchecked? The soil had begun to answer with green. The people had begun to answer with pride. The government had begun to answer with figures. But the world was preparing its own answer. Because beyond Burkina Faso's fields, another struggle was gathering. A struggle not only of soil and seed, but of sovereignty and survival. If the green shoots startled villagers, they unsettled foreign capitals even more. What began as laughter in European newspapers quickly sharpened into something else: unease. In Paris, cartoonists had mocked Burkina Faso with crude sketches of villagers tossing bananas into pits, captioned with the slur "Banana Republic." But when test plots turned fertile within weeks, the jokes rang hollow. A French editorial darkened the tone. If Ouagadougou insists on this path, it risks isolation from the global agricultural system. Behind the words was fear, not of fruit but of freedom. In London, policy analysts described the project as political theater, doubting its ability to scale beyond a few hundred hectares. Yet the insistence betrayed anxiety. What if it did scale? What if dependency could truly be broken by waste turned into wealth? In Washington, think tanks warned that Burkina Faso risked starving its people for symbolism. Their briefings labeled the experiment unsustainable, but also admitted that if proven viable, it could upend billion-dollar fertilizer markets. For some in the West, ridicule was a mask for alarm. Elsewhere, the tone was strikingly different. Moscow hailed President Traoré as a visionary, drawing parallels to Russia's own survival through ingenuity during years of sanctions. One broadcaster declared, "They laugh because he refuses to beg." History remembers those who create from nothing. In Beijing, state outlets pointed to China's own history of restoring fields with organic waste. Agricultural experts praised Burkina Faso's courage, hinting at partnerships that bypass Western influence. For China, the banana pits were more than science. They were a signal of new alliances. Ankara's voice was lyrical. Turkish commentators framed the burial not as folly but as dignity reborn. Bananas in the soil, dignity in the heart. For Turkey, The experiment symbolized the honor of finding solutions rooted in culture rather than dictated from abroad. But perhaps the most important chorus came from Africa itself. In Bamako, crowds shouted Traoré's name as if he were their own leader. In Niamey, radio stations debated whether Niger could bury its own surpluses in the desert. In Senegal and Guinea, memes that once mocked soon transformed into banners of pride. What outsiders saw as absurdity, insiders across the Sahel began to claim as sovereignty. The idea of cooperation emerged. If Burkina Faso could do it, why not Mali, Niger, or Chad? Why not a collective effort against desertification? Commentators began to whisper of a future Sahel Alliance, not only of armies but of farmers, scientists, and citizens united in turning waste into strength. And yet, even as alliances formed in imagination, corporations in Europe bristled. Every bag of fertilizer not imported was revenue lost. Every hectare revived by organic means was a dent in dependency. Pressure mounted in quiet boardrooms, in diplomatic cables, in the language of aid. For now, the banana pits had redrawn the map of perception. Ridicule in the West, solidarity in the South, inspiration across Africa. But beyond perception lay power, and those who profited from dependency were not likely to surrender it quietly. The question remained, could Burkina Faso's experiment survive the full weight of global resistance, or would outside pressure crush the green shoots before they became a harvest? The desert has spoken once, but what of tomorrow? Project Green Pulse has already stirred soil, minds, and politics. Yet the road ahead is neither smooth nor certain. The opportunities are immense. If bananas can restore fertility to exhausted fields, then what of other organic surpluses? Mango skins discarded in markets, peanut shells swept from warehouses, animal manure once left unused, all could become tools of survival. Farmers have already begun to experiment, trading tips across villages. A grassroots science is emerging, born not in laboratories abroad, but in the hands of ordinary people. Schools now organize banana days, when children bring fruit to contribute. For them, the project is not policy but participation. Soldiers who once shouldered rifles now shoulder crates, declaring that defending the nation can also mean feeding its soil. Villages once bound by despair now gather in celebration, proof that imagination can be as powerful as irrigation. But the risks are as real as the promise. Scaling is daunting. Restoring 200 hectares is one thing, transforming 2 million is another. Critics warn that organic methods cannot yet feed an entire nation, let alone a continent. Others fear that surpluses used for soil may reduce food available for markets. The government insists balance will be kept. Food fit for people will feed people, the rest will feed the earth. Still, skepticism lingers like a shadow. And beyond the soil lies geopolitics. Every shipment of fertilizer forgone is profit lost to powerful corporations. Every hectare revived organically is one less tied to foreign debt. Already, whispers of pressure have surfaced. Aid packages reconsidered, conditions threatened, diplomatic cables leaked. To challenge dependency is to challenge power, and power rarely yields without resistance. Yet the very weight of these risks is what makes the opportunity historic. For decades, Africa has been told that solutions lie offshore, that survival depends on aid, that dignity must wait. Project Green Pulse suggests another path, that resilience can rise from within, that sovereignty can be sown with what others discard. It is not charity, it is not pity, it is the soil reclaiming its pulse. And perhaps this is only the beginning. If bananas can awaken the desert, what might rivers and wells achieve if ancient irrigation methods are restored? If fruit can fertilize freedom, what might wind and sun achieve if harnessed not for export but for independence? The road ahead is uncertain, but it is open. It is a road built not by foreign engineers but by African hands, calloused yet steady, carrying the weight of hope. And so we arrive at the threshold of the final question. Will these seeds of defiance grow into a harvest of sovereignty? or will the desert reclaim them once more? The story of bananas buried in the Sahel began as a headline of ridicule. To many, it looked like waste, even madness. Yet what was mocked abroad has grown into something larger than fruit and soil. It has become a parable of defiance, a lesson in dignity, a reminder that sovereignty is not gifted, it is sown. From 100 tons of discarded bananas came more than green shoots. Came confidence, pride, and a glimpse of independence. Farmers touched soil that had once been lifeless and felt it breathe again. Children laughed as they learned that their hands could plant not only seeds but futures. Elders saw memory reborn, a link between ancestral rituals and modern resilience. The act that once drew cartoons now draws crowds inspired to act. For Burkina Faso, this is more than agriculture. It is a declaration that African solutions need not be borrowed or begged. It is proof that weakness can be redefined as strength, that fragility can become foundation. And for the wider continent, it offers a mirror. If one nation can begin to shift its destiny, why not others? This, perhaps, is the truest test of African leadership, to lead not by imitation but by imagination. Already voices speak of cooperation, of shared defiance, of a Sahel Alliance born not only of armies but of farmers, teachers, and children. Each buried fruit whispers that the future is not written in contracts abroad, but in the soil beneath African feet. And as these whispers grow into chants, they may form a chorus too strong to be silenced. The harvest, then, is not only millet and sorghum. The harvest is courage. The harvest is belief. The harvest is the refusal to bow. In that harvest lies the seed of the next chapter, a chapter where African leadership proves itself not through declarations in foreign halls, but through renewal in African fields. So we end with a question for you. If a single fruit can awaken a nation, what else might awaken a continent? If this story stirs you, do not let it fade. Subscribe, share, and carry it forward. Because the more we carry it, the stronger it becomes.